I am a big believer that before you ever touch your visuals, your strategy needs to be in place. Welcome back to Bespoke. If you haven't watched the previous lessons up until this point, I would encourage you to go back because we're talking about visuals and this is the final lesson in this series. With that being said, let's talk about the psychology of visuals, which is that last strategic piece that we're going to go into before we actually begin to design anything. The first thing that we're going to talk about is shape psychology. Each primary shape starts to bring with it a certain set of emotional associations. The first one we're going to go over are rounds. Circles and ovals represent continuity and perseverance. They do not have sharp corners, so they are unintimidating, soft, and have a femme tone. Cosmic objects like the universe and planets take on elliptical and round shapes, which creates an association with feelings of magic, mystery, and secrecy when we see circles. The next shape on our list here are orthogonal shapes. If you want to communicate discipline, boldness, stability, and balance, using orthogonal shapes will reinforce these perceptions for your viewer. Squares and rectangles are so widely used for good reason. They offer a sense of reliability and security, which is essential to communicate with many brands. Under this same umbrella of orthogonal shapes are lines. Horizontal lines make us think about expanded horizons, while vertical lines feel like growth and possibility. Triangles are the more energetic sister of the square. These are dynamic, active, and powerful. In spirituality, they represent perfect completeness. Triangles are often felt as a masculine shape due to their points, so it's worth thinking carefully about their use if your market is primarily female. The placement of lines naturally moves the eyes towards the direction that it's oriented in, so directionality does matter. Upwards facing triangles communicate steadiness and momentum. Sideways triangles indicate movement and action. Upside down triangles feel unbalanced and precarious. Going back to the softer shapes, we can look at the meaning of organics. Soft, abstract shapes reject the structure of geometricism and start to mimic the natural world. They are brave and filled with idiosyncratic personalities. These shapes and lines are often perfect for brands that would like to emphasize honesty. The next layer of visual psychology is color theory. I recommend choosing 1 to 2 primary colors for your brand, and then if you'd like, you can also select 2 to 4 secondary colors for accents. Once you've chosen your hues and colors, you can decide to tint them by adding white to make them pastel, or to shade them by adding black to make them a deeper swatch, or to tone them by adding gray to mute the color. This decision should align with the feeling that you'd like your brand to evoke. Vibrant hues will say something entirely different from soft pastel tints, so ensure that your color looks compelling together as a palette. If your colors don't feel like a set, begin to massage them until they do by tweaking the color values. Now I'm going to put up a chart on the screen that starts to describe what each different color might mean. Again, using a vibrant hue is going to evoke something different than a pastel, so it's worth doing a little bit of research into a color if you want to use it as a primary or a secondary color for your brand. But at a base level, pinks are often playful, reds are exciting, oranges optimistic, yellows happy, greens restorative, blues responsible, purple is spiritual, black is disciplined and sophisticated, gray is formal, beige is warm, and white represents purity in most Western cultures. These are just really simple words to keep in mind, but like I said, it's good to look into each color and decide whether or not it's a good fit for your brand. I wouldn't recommend just choosing your favorite color or even choosing the color that your target audience might love personally in their lives, but instead choosing a color that represents what you would like to represent, creating an atmosphere that is how you'd like people to feel when they interact with your brand. For example, just because I might love the color neon pink, I'm not sure that the bank that I walk into, I would like to see that color everywhere, because I want to make sure that a bank is really respectable. So if I'm seeing some orthogonal lines and rectangles and maybe they're using the color blue that often feels really responsible, that evokes the types of feelings that I would like to feel when I am storing my money somewhere. On the other hand, if I'm going somewhere that I want to feel fun and youthful, then maybe that's a really great place to see that pink. So just with that example, we can start to see how these shapes and colors and these elements of visual psychology come into play. So think about your brand, what you would like to communicate to your customers, who you're talking to, and start to choose things that have those correct associations for what you're going for. The next element of visuals that I'd like to talk about is typography. Your messaging can be even more powerful if the visuals attached to it reinforce what you're actually saying. So there are 3 different categories of fonts. There are serifs, sans serifs, and scripts. Serifs are typefaces that have slight marks to finish off the stroke of each letter or number. They often are smooth and rounded and have slight weight variation in the detail of each letter. Serif fonts have classic connotation due to their history. They evoke feelings of tradition, candor, and integrity. Their legibility has been debated, so designers often opt out of using serifs for large blocks of text, but for a primary font in your headings or as a logo type, they work really well. Sans serifs are the opposite. They are highly legible and accessible. These typefaces do not have an extra stroke on the ends of the letter forms, and they take on minimalist shapes. They are modern, sleek, pure, and geometric. Sans serifs are highly legible and can be utilized in long-form content for accessibility. Script fonts range from formal to casual, either as professional calligraphy or as whimsically handwritten notes, or they can be somewhere in between. These typefaces mimic cursive handwriting and they embrace fluid letter forms. They range from formal to casual, either as professional calligraphy or as a whimsically handwritten note, or somewhere in between. Scripts are elegant and stylized, and they work well in small doses. However, they're not good for large portions of body text. Once you've determined the shapes, the colors, and maybe the types of fonts that might agree with your brand's personality, you can start to think about your logo design. Do you want to use a word mark, which is a logo that is primarily just the brand name, and perhaps make your submark, aka the other mark that you might use in smaller applications like your Instagram profile picture or on the front of your business card or something like that? Maybe it's just a monogram of the first 2 initials of your brand name. You could use something that is a little bit more pictorial, like a symbol. We see lots of different brands that play with a lot of different things. It's completely up to you. But either way, I would really recommend getting a graphic designer or a brand designer to step in here if you don't have that skill set. If this is not something you can afford right now, what I recommend is doing a little bit of little black dress branding. I call it the little black dress because it's suitable for any occasion. So the little black dress branding method is creating a word mark. You could even just type it in something as simple as Word document and placing it in a font that makes sense for your brand. You can do a really simple serif or sans serif, something that is a little bit more nondescript and gives you space to grow later. I would rather that you do that than you go hire a designer off of a website or hire somebody whose prices are far too low just to get something that could be copyrighted, unoriginal, or just wrong for your brand and having to go back and redo that later. If you do something very simple, then people aren't going to build that association with your brand, and you're going to be able to launch a brand with a fresh start later on when you have the budget for it, rather than having to go back and rebrand and erase some of the damage that a poorly done brand identity can do. All that being said, if you have the skill set, if you know how to use Adobe Illustrator or something like that, and you're able to create a logo for yourself, then I would recommend first putting on music that sets the mood, that feels like the type of energy that you would like to bring to your brand, and just sketching. You can just start out sketching shapes and forms and lines and things like that that feel like your brand, and hopefully in that process you're going to capture something quite wonderful. When that is done, when you've sketched things and refined your sketches and iterated on them, scan those into the computer and start to trace them in Adobe Illustrator. That is how I create logos. Like I said, that's for more pictorial or iconic things. You can also do a logo that is a word mark. Usually this will just involve font selections. And then often I recommend, if you have the skills for it again, going into that font and starting to manipulate it so that you have something that is truly your own. You don't have to just be limited to the fonts that are already preloaded on your computer. If you have the Adobe Creative Suite, I would recommend going online to fontsadobe.com and activating some additional fonts so that you have more options for yourself. You can also go to online platforms like Creative Market and buy licenses for really affordable prices from type designers and get a font that is a little bit more unique than what you might typically see out there. If you want to be really fancy, there are some really awesome foundries that I love that I will link in the description below that design typefaces. Usually if you're buying straight from a foundry, it's going to be at a little bit of a higher price point, and you need to keep in mind that just buying the font does not always mean that you are able to use it for your branding. Sometimes there'll be two tiers of pricing, one of them for just using the font in a design and one of them for using a font as a brand identity. These foundries know that their fonts can just become a logo so easily because they've designed all these beautiful ligatures which combine letters together, and the fonts have a ton of personality, meaning they want to be paid and compensated for essentially designing your logo for you. So you want to read your licensing and make sure that you are allowed to use your font as a logo. And if they ask for you to pay an extra fee or email them, just make sure you reach out and do that. No matter how expensive it might feel to buy that extra license, it will be a lot more expensive and a lot more headache if you get sued later. As you are designing your logo, I want to leave you with a quote from Paul Rand. He said, "How far out of focus can an image be and still be recognized? A logo, which is subject to an infinite number of uses, abuses, and variations, cannot survive unless it is designed with the utmost simplicity and restraint." It's so important that you test your logo and your logo variations so that if they're blown up as big as a billboard or shrunk down as small as your Instagram profile picture in the comment section, it still works. It may mean that you need a submark or some different variations and lockups. Perhaps your full word mark is not legible at a small scale, so you just need to reduce it down to 1 or 2 letters. Or maybe you have a very long word mark and you just want to stack it for different types of applications. Or if you have an image, you just want variations of your logo that both have your brand image and your name, and ones with just your image alone. These are the things that you want to consider, but it's just important to make sure that you have something that will work for every type of application, and that if you're going for a more image-based logo, it's not so detailed to the point that it just becomes a smudge of color or something like that at a small scale, or it's not so simple that when it's blown up large, it looks really dull and boring and uninteresting. You want to make sure it's engaging and legible at all scales, and that will mark a successful logo. I want to empower you with some questions to ask yourself as you are ensuring your logo's effectivity across all platforms. Firstly, would this be an effective logo as a single color? Would this be an effective logo in the reverse color, like a light logo on a dark background and vice versa? Could this image be printed on multiple different paper types and viewed on different screens and uphold its visual integrity? Would this image remain legible and identifiable at a large scale and at small sizes? So you've spent time strategically determining what visual elements will make up your brand. Now is the time to build out your brand guidelines. It may seem unnecessary now, but the moment that you have a team, it's going to be essential that you have all of these things written down in a clear document. Take your colors and figure out what the color values are, or the hex code, or the RGB code, and make sure you note them down. It's not enough to just say my brand color is yellow. There's probably millions of different shades of yellow. You want to be precise about the exact color code. It's not enough either to just deliver a set of logos to people. You want to define which lockups you use where, what color combinations are all right with your logo. Are you okay with people having your image be in red and the word mark being in blue? Or is it important that the whole thing be in red or the whole thing be in blue? These are just examples I'm giving, but the more specific that you can be about the proper uses of your brand, defining common errors and telling people to avoid them, the more consistent things will be across the board. I suggest that people take the time to build out really great brand guidelines before they grow. Because trust me, when you're trying to hire on a team and your business is growing rapidly, that is the last time that you want to be just getting into defining your brand guidelines. The more of these things and these systems that you can set up beforehand, the easier things will be when you hit that explosive growth that I just know you will. Your style guidelines will eventually become an internal reference for your teams. You can incorporate more than just visuals into this as well. Yes, I think that you should define your logos, colors, and fonts at the bare minimum, but I would also recommend starting to define kind of imagery you use, the language you use, the voice of your brand, your company culture, and just making it an overall all-encompassing booklet that, even down to the look and feel and the graphic design of the document itself, gets people into the world of your brand and communicates to your team how they can portray your brand to the general public to start to shape and craft and curate that gut feeling that people have when they think about your business. If you're just as captivated by these topics as I am, then you can look into our Essential Guide to Visual Branding. It's an ebook and toolkit that walks you through in detail the entire branding purpose and embeds these theories of marketing, behavior economics, and psychology that inform visual design. Our goal is to ensure that all of your visuals are not only beautiful, but strategically rooted. In the ebook and toolkit are these worksheets that will help walk you through the steps of branding yourself. We hope you'll check it out. It's a really great way of supporting our studio and allowing us to continue to bring you this type of content. So I'll leave you with this question of how would you like to present? If you've been following along in the Essential Guide to Visual Branding, we've covered most of the content in the book at this point of our lesson series. There are some more details that we get into in here, but I'll join you in there. If you have any questions, leave a comment, and I'm so glad that you joined me. If you missed any of the earlier videos in this series, I would encourage you to go back because we covered a lot of the foundational content that will make this step of choosing visuals a lot easier and more effective. My name's Tosin, and I'm the founder and lead designer at Atelier to Oluwatosin. If you want to chat, my comment section is open, and you can also send us an email at the studio. We would love to meet you.